Good morning, and welcome to today's DCD debate, Best Practices when Selecting a Colo. This is our new webinar format that brings the dynamism of a DCD live conference panel to an online audience, and they're interactive. So you can ask questions, you can download materials. There'll be material we're referring to throughout the course of this webinar, and we've got some polls for you to answer that can help us guide the conversation. So, best practices when selecting a colo. Here's why we're discussing the topic. There's a big shift to hybrid models of operation, and everyone feels it's here to stay. Digital transformation is driving rising demands, and managed services are forming a key part of enterprise IT strategy. They're providing lower operational costs and low risk. Co-location is an attractive alternative to private data center investment, and what we're seeing is a highly competitive colo market. In response, the most competitive providers are offering high-level features, different managed services, real-time intelligence, and even more advanced technologies. And we're going to cover those technologies today with an idea about what businesses should think about when they're selecting a provider and the technologies that are on offer. Today we're going to talk to one of Europe's major colos that's using smart technology to help their tenants, and also to one of the top technology vendors that are developing management and automation solutions. I'm George Rockett. I'm the CEO at Data Center Dynamics, or DCD, a business dedicated to creating knowledge and networking opportunities for the data center and cloud infrastructure industries. I'm joined today by Adam Levine. He's the Chief Operating Officer at Data4. I've known Adam for 15 years, back to when he was at CBRE, when actually it wasn't called CBRE. I think it was Insignia Richard Ellis back then. And subsequently, he was VP of Sales in Europe at Digital Realty, when the business and the industry literally exploded in growth. Data4 is a European data center operator with 15 facilities in France, Italy, Luxembourg, and it's growing. I'm also joined by Enzo Greco. He's the Chief Strategy Officer at Enlight. They're a leading provider of automation and management systems for data centers. Enzo's a veteran of the critical facilities industry, having previously worked at Emerson, now Vertiv, as GM of their software business, where he was responsible for the entire data center software portfolio. Enzo started his career at AT&T Bell Laboratories, world famous, so quite some pedigree for today's discussion. Adam, can you quickly tell us a bit more about Data4 and what your role is there?
Thank you, George. Data4 is a leading European data center specialist. We finance, design, build, operate data centers in, as you quite rightly said, Paris, Milan, and Luxembourg. And we're currently delivering our fourth market, which is Madrid, in Q1 of next year. We started out very much as a large-scale wholesale data center provider in France, and we've branched out into new markets and also new products with a more retail co-location focus, as well as wholesale and hyperscale. And of course, that brings with it challenges on the product side, which has led us into automation, including such products as DCIM, which is what we're here to talk about today.
Enzo, can you do the same? Tell us a bit more about Enlight and what your role is there.
Yes, I'd be delighted to, George, and certainly my thanks for the invitation for today's call and for everyone on the call. So data centers are an interesting environment. They're certainly a complex environment, and they benefit from being run well. Yet there are a lot of moving pieces in a data center, and what we provide is the software and the expertise to manage that data center best, from the critical infrastructure up to the virtualization itself. And as data centers become ever more important to businesses, as they grow in scale, as they become ever more complex, we provide the solutions to manage that scale and complexity. And we are one of the top providers in that very good business. So it is a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to this discussion.
Excellent. Thank you both. So before we get into the discussion proper, I'd like to remind all of our audience that we've got a resources widget on the control panel screen. You can download some of the materials from there. We've got a recent research report commissioned by Data4. It's called Smart Data Centers for Next Generation Colo, and it's rather a good read. We're going to be referring to that in the discussion. There's also a download from Nlyte called 7 DCIM Considerations When Migrating to Colo, and some other useful documents. So you can go ahead now or later on downloading those. If you've got any questions during the conversation to ask our experts here, you can post them through the Q&A widget. I'm going to try and answer as many as I can during the conversation. If we can't, we'll get back to you after anyway. Enzo and Adam aren't going away. These are always ongoing industry conversations. Now, the first poll question that we've got to get a feel for who's on today's webinar, it's posted up there. It's, are you using DCIM within your data center environment? We want to hear from colo operators, enterprises, and those of you saying whether you're not using DCIM in any form at the moment. We'll get into that conversation later, but I think it's time to kick off now with what we want to talk about today. So you can't have a conversation about colo without understanding what's going on in the colo market. You can see here we've got some key topics today that we're going to go through. So the next chart I'm going to put up on screen is from the 451 Research Data Center Monitor. It shows compound annual growth rate of 8.1% through to 2023 for the colo industry globally. Enterprise is much slower at 2.5% because we know many workloads are moving to cloud and co-location. These are pretty good numbers. In my job, I get to see numbers all day long, and I've seen a number looking at this growth rate. Adam, what can you tell me about the growth that you're seeing within the sector, especially across Europe?
Yeah, so there's been a logical wave of growth in the tier T1. Get my maths down. The tier T1 markets for a more classic type of co-location, so especially space and power. But as we've seen more content move to the edge, and when I say move to the edge, I'm talking about both content being pushed towards the edge, but also content created at the edge with such advents as IoT, smart cars. There is a greater need for automation. And that's what we're here to discuss today as well is what's driving a lot of the growth in this sector, and how is the sector adapting to meet their customer requirements.
Okay, and Enzo, what are you seeing with this growth? What's your story of growth behind the scenes?
So first, we have George, what I'd like to give is just a little bit of perspective with respect to Europe. So we have the luxury of being a worldwide provider. We have very good installations in all the different geographies, and in the last 12 months, we have seen by far some of the biggest growth in Europe. And I think that's even larger than North America. And I think there are many factors for that, especially when you look at the issues such as GDPR, you look at other factors that are driving the consolidation of co-location providers in particular. So we've seen good growth across all of the geographies, but especially in Europe.
Okay, interesting. I think we'll come back to that later with when we look at the technologies and the maturity within the market. So, interesting. With growth comes competition, right? Adam, what does this increased competition mean for colo providers and their tenants? Have we lost Adam temporarily there?
No, I'm here. Sorry, I was just on mute. Sorry, user error.
Yeah, no. So, Just saying there, what does the increased competition mean for you as a colo provider and for your tenants?
Yeah, George, when I'm on mute, I can still hear you. So
you're right.
Apologies. So yeah, as always, competition. I mean, as usually is the case anyway. Competition is usually good for consumers, right? That's why monopolies and mergers commissions exist, to ensure that there is healthy competition in the marketplace. And what this competition is doing today in the market is that it means that owner operators like ourselves, we're not just having to provide value and quality in a core, but an increasingly commoditized product, but we need to create and innovate and differentiate so that we can show that there are differentiators between competitors, and also we need to meet these accelerating demands from our customers, and those customers are increasingly demanding for more transparency and more automation. And so, the beauty of all that is that actually it benefits everybody. It benefits the customers, but it also benefits us as operators, because increased transparency and automation, it means also creating better traceability of operations. It means that it's easier for us to be compliant and to get certification. What we've noticed is that in previous years, certification was something that was quite manual. There'd be a lot of information gathering and a lot of man hours doing that. But this increased transparency and automation that's been required by our customer base is actually benefiting our own core business as well.
Okay, that's interesting. Enzo, what does it mean for technology vendors like you? You alluded to it before that you're seeing growth in the colo area, but the increased competition, I'm guessing it's good for business.
It's good for business, and I think most importantly, it's good for the end user. They are getting ever more value for their investment. And I think George hit it right on. In the market, as with any market that has many different providers, you are seeing ever more innovation. You are seeing ever more efficiency. And I think what is interesting about this market, and I know Adam will be alluding to this in a bit, but you are getting the co-location providers going into adjacent markets, offering ever more features as a way of differentiation and as a way of delivering more value to their customers. And we are getting certainly requirements for addressing some of those additional features that co-location providers are requiring, such as remote management and automation, exactly as Adam just said.
Okay, just out of interest, Enzo, what percentage of Enlight's install base is colo? Can you tell us, or is that a closely guarded secret?
No, it's about a quarter of our installed base are co-location providers, fairly evenly split worldwide. But as I said before, we've seen more growth in Europe than in other regions over the last 12 months.
Okay. So we've established growth. Now, interestingly, the word hybrid IT is a big industry buzzword. It certainly is at DCD conferences and in our magazines, but there's often quite a lot of ambiguity around the term. The definition depends on who you're talking to within the stack. As with many things, I think, like with cloud and like with edge, we've got a slide up there that's just kind of like covering some of the market, where the market is in terms of their move towards hybrid. So just something out there of interest if it's coming from the white paper I alluded to before. So with this ambiguity, Adam, can you explain hybrid IT in the context of today's discussion, or in the context of Data4, please?
Sure, and I think you're absolutely right, George. It's one of those words where. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, perfectly.
Okay, great. It's one of those words where there has been a lot of ambiguity around it, and I think for the the benefit of this conversation, what I would say is we should define hybrid IT as having interconnected on-premises and cloud applications. True hybrid IT solutions should seamlessly and simultaneously use both dedicated and public resources. So I'll give you an example. If you're using Salesforce for market analytics, and that is pulling source data from various on-premises databases, that for me is the true definition of hybrid IT.
Anything to add there, Enzo?
Sure. If you look at Adam just hit a key point, which is the ability to use resources regardless of where they may sit. And customers have ever more options. And they certainly have on-premise resources. They have premise in perhaps a co-location facility. They have resources in the cloud. They have resources as a service. And hybrid IT is managing all of those different resources in a cohesive fabric. And some customers certainly do it better than others, and some of the technology providers are leading the curve. And for the customers, though, hybrid IT is both a great opportunity, and I think where the market is right now, it's one of the biggest challenges that end users face.
Hi, Adam. Sorry there, I was having an issue with the mute button as well. I'm not used to being mute. So Enzo left off there about the challenges. You're the end user as a colo provider, but also you're the direct connection to the end user enterprise clients we're talking about. What challenges are your customers facing today that are running hybrid IT portfolios with you?
Yeah, thank you. So good question, and I would say that there are three key areas where our customers are really challenged. The first is the in-house skill sets, and it comes back to what we were saying earlier. If you take hybrid IT, the definition of being the interconnectivity and simultaneous use of dedicated and public resources, there are very few enterprise customers that have the depth in their teams, the knowledge depth, to really manage a true hybrid solution. And so what we're seeing that this is actually driving a number of enterprises back into the arms of some systems integrators, give you IBM, Atos, Accenture, to manage the migration and then the ongoing hybrid environments. And the irony is, of course, that a number of these enterprises have in the past moved away from those systems integrators and managed their outsourced co-location facilities themselves. And of course, this is a sort of back to the future scenario. So that's the first interesting challenge and call it unintended consequence we're seeing of that. The second is the quality of connectivity. So in order to deliver a true hybrid solution, the customer really needs to know the quality of the connection, and particularly latency, jitter, and packet loss. And the best way of ensuring that is to use a dedicated, secure connection, which you don't normally find with Internet Protocol, with IP. And so this is why you're seeing such a lot of activity around cloud on-ramps and why they're so important, because they give that secure access to the cloud that enables hybrid IT solution. And that's why there is a lot of activity around, examples are AWS Direct Access, Microsoft Express Route, IBM Direct Link, or in other situations, like I'll give you an example of what we use. We have a platform called Data4 Hub Cloud that enables access to over 150 different cloud instances, but through a direct secure link. And so without those secure links, it's very hard to have a true hybrid IT platform. And then the last thing is visibility. Your capacity planning in hybrid is key. There's no point going to the expense and hassle of having a hybrid solution if you can't view and manage workloads and the distribution of those workloads. And I think this is where the DCIM tool that we're talking about today really will really come into its own and really show its value in the data center world when it can actually help the customers visualize those workloads and manage them to provide a good balance between dedicated and public resources.
Okay, Adam. Okay, that's a really good answer, detailed answer. We'll probably pick up on some of those points down the line. Enzo, what are the technology challenges? I guess the technology and the skill set challenges, because we're going to talk a lot about the technology later, but overall, what are the challenges of moving to hybrid?
So we see firsthand three, and I think they directly complement what Adam just went through. The first is capacity and capacity management. Customers, the end users, have ever more computing platforms, in-house, cloud, colo as a service, and it's really hard to manage the capacity, knowing just how much subscription you need from AWS as an example. So certainly one of the first is capacity. The second is virtualization placement, so workload placement. I have these workloads. They're the basic unit of management of my applications. Where do I place those workloads optimally? The different platforms that I have, each have different characteristics in cost, in security, in flexibility. And I think we all would understand that many customers have ever more platforms to run their workloads, but they're increasingly not placing the workloads in the right place. So that's the second. And the third is DevOps. So there are a lot of great tools in the marketplace that customers have used forever to develop their applications, to deploy their applications, to manage their applications. And a lot of those tools have not caught up to this hybrid model, to this much richer model. Certainly all the providers are trying to get there, but at this point in the marketplace for the end users, that's one of the biggest challenges, the whole DevOps piece of deploying and managing the applications in an ever richer fabric.
Okay, so it's interesting. We've got this shifting skills matrix that's going on, right? You've got companies that for years have run their own data centers on-premise with the engineering skill sets and the IT skill sets for that, and now they're moving outside and they need different skills and there's trouble there. That's understandable. I want to move on now to a discussion about technology. We wanted to talk about the importance of data center infrastructure management and automation in all of this. I'm pretty sure that most people on today's webinar know what DCIM is, but it's always good to build the discussion from the ground up. And seeing as we've got you on the line, Enzo, you're one of the early pioneers of this technology. I'm just going to put a slide up, which is a maturity model, again from one of the white papers. Enzo, can you give us what DCIM is now, please? Just tell us.
Sure. So DCIM is the tools and the processes to manage the different assets within the data center, from the critical infrastructure up through the IT computing environment up to the applications themselves. And DCIM provides pretty much the complete lifecycle management for those different assets. And as we said at the beginning, as data centers become ever larger, as they become ever more complex, the systems and the processes become more complex and more critical with them. And that's where DCIM tools have been proving themselves of late in providing both the management as well as the optimization required for these data centers. And that's pretty much the state of the art for DCIM tools, and where we see them going is ever higher in the stack into virtualization and workload management. Okay.
We had a call. Look, we speak quite often at events, and obviously, trying to prep for this, we had a call for this webinar, and there was an interesting thing. Can you also tell us what it's not? Because on today's call, we're talking about colo providers and enterprise operators. And the word building management system came up in a previous conversation. Can you tell us what DCIM is not in this context?
So I will certainly volunteer this first. I'm sure Adam, as the end user, will have some more detail. BMS is very much exactly what it sounds like. It is very much tied to the building. And what is interesting in the marketplace is there is increasingly overlap and integration between BMS systems and DCIM. So nearly every building type has a kind of BMS. So if you look at an office building, there is often a BMS of some sort, managing cooling, managing security, and so forth. And what is interesting about data centers is data centers are certainly a building. However, they are more complex than other kinds of buildings. Data centers are certainly dependent and affected by the dynamic workloads and applications and systems that run within the building. So what we are seeing in the marketplace is an ever more blurring of DCIM and BMS systems. In fact, the best data centers have very tight integration between those systems. And I don't think DCIM ever has aspirations of becoming a BMS, but I think DCIM certainly needs to integrate with different BMS systems, and the same is true in reverse. BMS certainly benefits when they have the information and the dynamic management that a DCIM system provides. And in the marketplace, we are seeing these two systems required to be very tightly integrated. And in fact, that is a very large part of our effort and investment as a company.
Okay. I think it's clear, it's important to delineate these things for purposes of the conversation. Now, I've got the maturity model back on the screen. I just want to finish off with you on this end. Can you just talk us a bit through the maturity model and where most customers are?
So most customers are at, and again, I think it would be great to get Adam's perspective on this as the end user, but many customers are at that automation step. So they are at the phase where they certainly benefit from automation. They benefit from having the processes around it, the processes for all the different systems that they may have, and not just automating, but optimizing those processes. One of the biggest drivers for that automation is, again, the scale that Adam mentioned at the beginning, but it's also the fabric that customers have. So they don't have these dedicated, customers have more than just one large dedicated facility. I think Adam made a very good point at the beginning of Edge. So now you don't have suddenly a single data center. You have many widely geographically dispersed facilities. You cannot manage those without automation. And I think where most customers are is exactly at that automation phase because they need to be. Adam, as one of the end users, I think you'll have some unique perspective on this maturity model.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, do you want me to chip in, George, or did you want to?
No, absolutely. I was going to ask it, but you talk. My question is, how are the colos deploying this? But yeah, you go ahead. Thanks, Enzo.
So I think just sort of come back to, I think everybody has their own definition of what DCIM is and what its place in the market is, and just to sort of come back a couple of questions and just sort of chip in my 2 cents. I think that what DCIM is and where it differentiates itself from something like a BMS or a more manual monitoring system, is that it's the tool that we will use going forward to virtualize the physical infrastructure. Yeah, and if you look at the evolution of compute, right, over the years, we virtualized compute to make it more efficient, to ensure that resources were efficiently used and optimized, and we did that through VMware, through hypervisors, and now it would seem completely abhorrent to be dedicating a server to a particular type of software or platform. Then the next thing to go was storage, then networks, which became, we had software-defined networks, and all of that was around virtualizing and optimizing the physical layer of those parts of the industry. And the logical next step is virtualizing the physical facilities, and I think that's where what DCIM brings to the table, and that's certainly how we view it. With regards to the maturity level, the maturity matrix, I absolutely agree with Enzo. That we're kind of entering into probably fairly ensconced in the level 3, which is the automation proactive phase, whereby the DCIM is becoming integrated at the facility level, and we're starting to use that to do better predictive maintenance, to start to predict behavior of certain individual components within the facility, and really, we're well on our way to the next level, which is the integration of the facility with the customer's own physical servers, and then being able to then visualize their actual workload.
Okay, interesting. So we're kind of like going back to today's title, Adam and Enzo. What are the best practices when selecting a colo? And I guess to answer that, we've got to understand how colos are actually deploying this. What are the services they're giving their clients, as well as what client requirements are. I'll put a slide up, the next slide, which kind of like looks at the importance of information in colo. It's just got some of the things that people look for, looking at power monitoring, quality of power, risk analyses and things from this. Can you tell us a little bit about your deployment of DCIM with your clients, Adam? The functionality that you're looking to bring on and the functionality that's being used.
With pleasure, George. So going back to just, it's always good to go back to the title and remind ourselves why we're here and what people tuning into this webinar want to hear and want to try and understand. And as you said, best practices when choosing a data center. And then we have to remind ourselves what some of the, we get lost in the minutiae sometimes, and it's good to remind ourselves what the fundamentals are when you are choosing a data center. And the reality of it is, it's uptime, it's good functioning of the equipment, it's keeping the lights on, the power on, and the air blowing through, so that workload continues and the servers function and networks function. And of course, as I said at the beginning, that's become almost commoditized, and we almost take that for granted. And so, what DCIM does do is it helps us monitor those key elements of power, of cooling, of life safety, and we see that that's still what's most important to our customers. They want to monitor the power, the quality of power, the quality of air, the temperature levels, the humidity, and that is still the most important thing for them, because that's what enables them to analyze the risk of an interruption of service or of downtime, and that enables them in turn to shift workload. And that's where DCIM can really come into its own, because it then provides that visibility, the holistic visibility between the physical infrastructure and the virtual infrastructure.
Okay, I can see that. Now, Enzo Enlight did a paper a while ago, an interesting read, which is, bringing it up on my screen, 7 DCIM considerations when migrating to Colo. You can download it at the moment within the resources widget. Can you tell us about the considerations that you found out from your clients? Because that's not directly linked to the Colo. This is you speaking with your clients about what they need to know.
Sure. So without giving away the punchline of that white paper, and without going through all 7 of them, I think that underlying it is a very important factor, which we've alluded to several times already in this webinar, which is a co-location facility for many customers, and this ties in the hybrid discussion that we've had, is an extension of their own facilities. It's an extension of their own data center. It's an extension of other computing facilities that they may have. And what customers need is visibility into that co-location facility. It's still their equipment. It is very much a place to run their workloads. And what customers need, and this is what we see firsthand, is customers need visibility into that facility, into their equipment, even though it may be remote. And as Adam said, it's that visibility, it's that virtualization of both the space and of the computing facility that is where we are seeing the features for co-location providers that are being required most by end users. Again, I will emphasize, many customers view co-location facilities as an extension of their own facilities, and they need visibility and management to manage all of that infrastructure as one.
Enzo, I completely agree and I completely concur. And in fact, what I would say is that one of the things that automation has done and is doing is it can actually help a customer overcome some potentially initial reluctance that they may have to outsource their infrastructure, because by giving them that visibility, it gives them a level of security and a level of comfort that they may not otherwise have had. And so that's definitely something that's definitely an advantage that we see, and why we use your products and your solutions. That's something that we have definitely seen, and it's definitely an advantage when we're talking to our enterprise customers.
Yeah. So, Adam, I mean, some colos might feel, because not all colos are there, right? Some colos might feel they're creating a rod for their own back. When we start looking at SLAs, for years it was always a question of, well, really, how do you enforce an SLA with your colo provider? How do you see that from an SLA management perspective?
I think transparency is key. It's one of our core values as a business, and I don't see any problem with it. And in fact, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Coming back to what I said earlier about how it gives us visibility at the infrastructure level, and it helps us manage the physical infrastructure. But the next step is it also helps us manage the environmental footprint of the data center. So we go beyond that sort of basic power, cooling, fire, life safety, monitoring and managing. And we go into the next level, which is how do we now optimize the use of that to ensure that we're getting better PUEs, better WEs, better use of our own physical infrastructure. If we can do better predictive maintenance, we can extend the life cycles of our capital infrastructure, which is going to bring our costs down. It's going to mean that we're going to consume fewer batteries, fewer UPSs, and so all of that has an impact on the overall environmental footprint. So I don't see really anything negative with transparency. The only time it would be negative is if you're trying to hide something, and we're certainly not.
Yeah, okay. I see that. But that's why you're on the webinar today, because you're kind of like ahead of the curve, right? How do you see that from an SLA management perspective, Enzo, the functionality that's available?
I think, again, as we were just talking about, where customers view co-location facilities as an extension of their own facilities, they view the ability to remotely manage and validate SLAs as a very important feature. So it's still their equipment, and it is still the end customers ultimately have the responsibility for delivering their applications both internally and externally. And customers need that confidence, and they need the tools to be able to manage that overall environment. And being able to validate the SLAs remotely is a very important feature, as well as being able to predict if there will be any issues with SLAs in the future. So it's not just it's not just the issue of my equipment is currently happy, but can you predict whether I have any issues upcoming? Because if I have any kind of visibility into some issues, I may have the ability to take action, maybe to migrate workloads, to take other action, again, to keep my applications up and available.
Okay. Now, you mentioned something right at the beginning of the call, right? That you had a global perspective, Enzo, which you do, and that you were seeing more activity in Europe in the colo market. How much more, and I'm assuming that's Europe is more advanced, the drivers that you spoke about, GDPR and other things, is more advanced in needing to adopt automation and management. Can you give us a bit of background to where Europe lies at global level in technology adoption for colos?
I can just give my perspective and put it certainly in perspective with other geographies. I think certainly North America was one of the first in certainly leading the co-location market, and I think recently certainly Europe has had so much growth because it has caught up. But there are other interesting factors. So in Europe, you have many different and distinct countries, and with some of the privacy concerns, with some of the cost concerns, and I'm sure Adam can hit this better than I, but with some of the communication, the underlying communication facilities, both taking into account within countries and across countries, there is a very strong drive that we see to centralize within different geographies. And that is a factor that we see less so than, for example, in the North American market. So what we see firsthand is not just the growth, but the kinds of requirements that come from that growth, which is managing privacy, validating where different data and applications are running, managing the underlying communications ever more carefully, and providing visibility across all of the different computing facilities that a customer has. And I think that is what has been driving the growth in Europe recently, especially compared to other geographies.
Okay.
Adam, you probably have the best perspective of all, being that provider in Europe, being the top provider in Europe.
Yeah. So looking at the landscape, Adam, I agree. Where do you see yourselves in this deployment as compared with competitors? Do you feel you're ahead of that curve, or in the pack at the top, or what's the position?
Loaded question, George. Never want to blow my own trumpet too loud. To be honest, it just feels like a natural progression for us. We didn't do it to go and beat everybody out. It just felt like a natural progression to us to do it. Our customers were asking for it. In many ways, Data4 is a business that's kind of had two distinct periods, right? We started out as very much part of that, I would say almost fortress-style data center that was being built back in the early 2000s, which was primarily focused on financial services, large enterprise end users, whereby it was all about the physical security, right? Connectivity was barely even a thought. It was, I just need a point-to-point Ethernet connection back to my trading floor or back to my primary data production facility, and but it's all about physical security and creating almost this island. And we've come into this second era of data, almost third era really, where the second era was the internet exchanges, connectivity really started to take on a prevalence, and this third era is the cloud and hybrid era. And as we see more and more complexity within the data center, not just at the physical infrastructure level, it just seemed logical to us that that you needed a tool that gives you as much visibility into that as possible, and that then the fact that it can then drive automation further down the line, again, it's that sort of logical next step. So I think we probably are a little bit ahead of the curve on this. One of the things is that we, in some ways, we're smaller than some of the big pan-continental providers, and for them to go and install a retrofit a DCIM solution, it's going to be challenging for them. But I know everybody's looking at this. It's these things don't exist in isolation. Once somebody starts doing it and starts seeing the benefits, and once customers, right, that's the key here, right? Once customers start seeing the real benefits, and that they start seeing that there are both operational, financial, and environmental benefits from deploying a tool like this, everybody will want to do it because the customers will require it. And it goes back to what we said at the beginning. What's the benefit of what's the increased competition doing? Well, it means that we have to be far more attentive to what our customers want and make sure that we provide those solutions.
Okay. Well, you weren't blowing your own trumpet. I mean, it's always important. I mean, that people don't get on webinars to talk about what they're doing unless they're early adopters in something, right? So, pat on the back there. Enzo, I've got a question, which is just around the challenges of deploying DSIM within a multi-tenant data center facility, right? So you've got within that for the use of clients. Can you just talk us a bit through the technical challenges of doing this? Because usually, the 75% of your install base, you're going into a facility, it's a holistic system that you have control of and no one else is coming into it. The difference here is you might have hundreds of people using this. Are there any added complexities?
I think that from, again, first-hand experience, there are two. One architectural, one privacy. So you need to have the right architecture so that you don't have, for example, 100 distinct instances of an application for 100 different customers. That's, I think we all understand, it's not a scalable model. It's not a manageable model. So you have to have just technically and architecturally the right kind of model to support the scale of a colo, and many colos have many hundreds of tenants within them. That's one. But the second is absolute and fierce adherence to privacy. You want to ensure in a multi-tenant facility that there is separation of the different tenants and that information is fiercely held. And this is where we were talking before, George, about the integration of BMS and DCIM. This is one of those interesting areas where inside of a co-location facility, you have both physical and virtual different spaces for tenants, but those need to be integrated. So in my BMS, if I'm saying this space is for this tenant, that needs to be reflected in a DCIM system as well. So I can't in my DCIM system say I need to move this rack from this space to this space, and suddenly those two spaces belong to different tenants. So in a co-location in particular, there are ever more requirements for integrating the physical with the virtual, and really that increasingly means integrating the BMS with the DCIM systems.
Okay. I imagine there's challenges with every client and every individual deployment, right? So we've kind of covered here some best practice, what Data4 is doing, how you perceive the market. We don't have a lot of time left. We're in the final 5 or 6 minutes. I want to kind of cast an eye to the future. Enzo, you've been on a few previous webinars, DCD debates, looking at AI and machine learning as an overlay to DSIM in the future. There's also quite a lot published on our websites, and you've been vocal about this at our events. Can we talk about a little bit about the future of DCIM? What are the next few layers that are going to appear, and maybe try and have some relevance, pull in some relevance for this kind of like colo tenant market?
Sure. I think that there are two big trends to look for, and two big trends that are certainly driving the innovation and driving the DCIM market. The first is workload management. And again, as we've been saying throughout, customers have an ever more complex environment to run their different applications and workloads, on-prem, in the cloud, as a service, and I'm sure that there are other models that are evolving. And customers need visibility into that entire stack. They need visibility for a given workload. Where does it run best? Where is the best cost per workload? Where is the best security profile for that given workload? And again, that visibility needs to run across the facilities, but especially within the colo, because colos, as we all have seen, are the largest growth of data center capacity. And so directly from that, you will have ever more workloads running within colos, and end users will rely on ever more visibility into those co-location facilities to optimally place those workloads. That's one major trend. The second, as you already mentioned, is around this area of AI, machine learning. Those are specific terms, but I think overall it's this area of advanced analytics. So we have ever more data coming from our data centers, from sensors, from critical equipment, from applications and virtualization themselves, and a lot of this information we tend to ignore. Yet with the proper cognitive or with the proper analytics, we have ever more information to be able to take action. And the reason that we're seeing analytics are becoming ever more important is the scale and complexity and optimization of these data centers require it. You simply have too many inputs to be able to predict all the possible outcomes without an analytic system. You simply cannot enumerate all of the possible conditions, and that's a perfect place for AI. And as we've seen both firsthand and anecdotally in the marketplace, data centers are particularly well suited to analytic and cognitive solutions, which is why there's so much chatter and interest in the market about it. So again, to summarize, two big trends: workload management and analytics.
Great. And Adam, looking to the future, you're kind of like adopting these technologies. You must have, a number of a year. You're looking many years forward. What do you see as the future once you've got DCIM-enabled tenants? Where's the next step for a business like Data4?
Honestly, I think Enzo's really covered it all. It's the idea of all of this, the sort of the apotheosis of all of this, which would be great, would be if the tool becomes itself a prognosticating tool and can then start automatically enabling workloads to shift in advance of events that it can see coming, because it's analyzed the data. It's analyzed so many billions of scenarios that it can predict with a fairly accurate to a fairly accurate degree, at least within a percentage, at least within 1 percentage point of error, that there is going to be an interruption of service. It knows where workload can move to. It can understand the nature of workload. It can do risk analysis. It can shift that workload automatically. And if that, that's really the sort of the utopian scenario. Certainly, from where we sit on it, we're a long way from that, because we sit really at the physical infrastructure layer. But it's really I guess the only limit to this is the imagination of our customers and how they can visualize using this themselves. We'll put this tool in and we'll make it available to our customers, and really it's down to them to now use that and get the most out of it. and to ensure that we can start to explore the limits of the possibilities of this tool.
Okay, utopian futures is what we're all about. So
not dystopian ones, obviously. Not dystopian.
those are the ones that happen, not the ones we dream of. Maybe we can de-sim that, plug that into the world. It's time to close this off. I've really enjoyed the conversation, where it's taken us. There's some highly relevant downloads for those people that are listening that will give a bit more shape to the discussion, fill in between the cracks. And as always, on DCD, on our datacenterdynamics.com website, there's plenty more information about hybrid IT, data center automation, AI. Go mad. Go and spend hours. Don't do any more work. Just spend hours on our website. It's all there. But to finish off, gentlemen, a closing word from each of you on the subject title. What is your key best practice, 1, 2, or 3 best practices that people should look out for when selecting a colo? Enzo, can I start with you, and then we can finish on the colo? Enzo.
Sure. And I think, again, if the key is to view that colo as an extension of your own facility, an extension of your own computing capacity, and I would look for tools that provide visibility and provide validation of SLAs, because the equipment and the applications that you have in that colo are still your equipment and your applications, and having visibility and management into that, even though it may be a remote facility, that I believe is a key differentiator that I would look for in choosing colos.
Great. Simply view colo as an extension of your own facility. I mean, it's a simple phrase, but I guess when you think about it, there's a lot more complexity in getting that right. And Adam, final word with you, please.
Yeah, it's not very original. It's just an extension of what Enzo said. Look at our data center. Look at a new facility as an extension of your own. And in terms of best practices, look for transparency and visibility. Because, as we said earlier, if there's nothing to hide, then any colo provider should be open about showing you, giving you access through a DCIM portal into what's going on in the data center, into what's going on in the facility, what's going on in individual components. And then you can almost move away from that old discussion, as I said, about having to go and look at what the individual components are that make up any particular facility. If you know that you've got visibility and access into it from remote visibility into the facility, that should give you the confidence that you need that your colo provider is doing it right and they've got nothing to hide, and B, that that if you do have issues around control, that you can assuage those worries that you may have had in the past through tools like DCIM.
Okay, excellent. Gentlemen, Adam Levine for Data4 and Enzo Greco for Nlyte, thank you very much for participating in today's discussion. You've provided us and the listeners with lots of useful information. Once again, head to the website if you want follow-ups on this or to dig deeper into the subjects that we've covered today. Thank you from me, George Rocket of Data Center Dynamics, and we'll see you very soon on another webinar or at a conference near you.